An O'Leary so prominent in our community until at the Walks of Life. I think I met you the first time you were there with Chris. We were all sitting
Yes.
at the same table. And I thought you were one of the a law student he had brought along. Does everybody tell you how young you look?
I get that a lot, but
You've been around or what?
I've been around a little while.
First thing I want to ask you is, why do we need a housing court at all in Cleveland? I don't know. I never have been in housing court, so I was just wondering, what does it do? Give us the background of
Sure.
what do you do.
There are only two specific housing courts in the whole state, Cleveland and Toledo, and ours is the oldest. It was set up in 1980 and started in 1981, so we're in our 38th year. But there had been discussion about starting a housing court for years before that. I think one of the earliest newspaper articles I saw was from the 60s. And it really was just to focus specifically on housing issues, because you have your municipal courts that deal with speeding tickets and petty thefts and small claims, and that's normally where landlord, tenant, and code enforcement cases go. But with a city as large as Cleveland, where our population has declined significantly, and our housing stock is older. It averages at least 80 years old, and it's largely wood frame. So the thought was we really needed to focus on those issues and have a judge and have a court with the expertise to deal with those issues. So our court deals, we have jurisdiction over the whole city of Cleveland and Bracknell, and any structure within the city of Cleveland, we have jurisdiction over it, including the uses of it and all the landlord-tenant issues.
So if somebody is not keeping their property up and it's reported to the city goes to you.
That's correct. And I actually used to be the person at the city either to bring the case or to prosecute it. I supervised the prosecutors in housing court for 6 years, and then I was the assistant director and director of the building department for 10 and a half years before moving over to the court. So that's correct. The city takes complaints, so people can call in complaints or send in complaints, but the city also has a proactive inspection program where they go out and inspect the properties without complaints. But then when they see code violations, either the building department, the health department, or the fire department will issue a violation notice. If the property owner does not fix it within the time frame that they give, then they can file a criminal case in my court. And we get about 4,000 to 5,000 criminal cases per year.
Oh my goodness. Could this be used against poor people that are trying to own a house and maybe not have the money to fix a house up? How do you deal with that?
Well, we see that all the time, and it's my job as the judge to get all the information I can about every case and make the appropriate decision. I did have a lady the other day, and this is not unique. I see it all the time. It had been her father's house. She'd lived there for probably 50-some years, and she can't afford her home. And so the city did bring the case as a criminal case.
Criminal?
That's correct.
Really?
The code enforcement cases are largely criminal. They can bring them as a civil case for an injunction, where basically I just order them to fix something or to stop using it illegally. But for the most part, they do bring them as criminal cases.
Why is that? It doesn't seem to be like a terrible capital crime.
It's not. They're misdemeanors. And it's a little hard for people that aren't used to the system to kind of grasp that. Even the lawyers. I've had lawyers come to me and say, well, this is really quasi-criminal. And I said, yes, and at the end of the day, I could send your client to quasi-jail. It's going to feel an awful lot like real jail. But, they all joking aside, they are criminal. But I have to take into consideration for all the circumstances. So if I have a property owner who is an investor and has the money, and they just haven't taken the steps to fix it,
Yeah.
that to me is something that I look at it and I make sure that the sentence is appropriate.
You'd be more severe on the
Right.
outside landlord, I suppose.
Right, and I've had cases where people come in and they say, "Well, I don't have the money to fix this." And I said, "Well, then you probably shouldn't have put your vacation photos on Facebook, because you chose to spend your money on a nice vacation versus fixing your home." Now contrast that with the lady I was talking about, where she had lived in her family home. It's in tax arrears. She has a lot of other debts, and she, I believe, gets under $1,000 a month from Social Security. Our staff is working with her to try to see if there are resources that are available for her to fix her home. But part of that process is really looking at, should you consider other alternatives? Nobody wants to see somebody out of their home, particularly their family home. But I've worked with a lot of people in that situation, and I encouraged her to at least consider that maybe a smaller home that's well maintained, where she doesn't have all of the debt that she has, that being warm, safe, and dry, and in a place she can afford is going to take a weight off of her. So it just all goes back to weighing all of the factors that I have, and then making the best decision that I can.
But how can you find the time? I'm sure there's lots of cases like this.
Yes.
How do you find the time? If there's a lot of people like this, it is very time consuming.
It is, and my staff is very good.
Must be big.
I have 51 staff members, and it's the largest staff for a single judge court in the state, and it's because of the heavy caseload. We have over, on average, over 10,000 civil cases. About 90% of those are landlord-tenant cases. So I have magistrates who hear a lot of those cases. They actually hear most of the eviction cases. And then on the criminal side, I hear the cases initially, but we do have some specialized dockets that magistrates hear. And then for the research that I'm talking about that I need to be able to make the right decisions, I have staff that are called housing court specialists. And they're basically probation officers with specialized training in housing matters. So we have, I have a dedicated staff who's experts in their areas, and they all do their job and assist me in doing mine.
Do you think the courts deter home ownership, or maybe encourage home ownership? Which way would go?
I don't know that we either
You don't look
deter
at
it
it
or
that way.
encourage it. We just look at it as whatever situation someone is in, that we'll work with them. So
Would you encourage somebody to say, look, this doesn't look like it's going to work out. Why don't you just get out and get an apartment?
We do talk to people about their options, and we'll typically tell them, it's your decision. I'm not going to tell you, that you need to move. But sometimes you have to help people to see for themselves clearly what the situation is. So I would never tell somebody they had to leave their house unless it's enforcing an order from the building department or the fire or health departments. But there's times that the housing court specialists, in working with people, do encourage them to consider other options. But we want to make sure that people know what all the resources available are. We get people who are currently renting and say they want to own, and we'll tell them, well, these are the things that you want to look for. You want to look at the condition of the house, but you also want to look at, can you afford this particular house? You don't want to buy more than what you can afford, and then you can't maintain it. So again, we look at the whole range of housing issues. Our staff is available for walk-ins from 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, and we have neighborhood clinics throughout the year. I try to have enough of them throughout the city so that nobody has to drive more than about 10 to 15 minutes to get to one. And if you come to one of our neighborhood clinics, or a landlord clinic or a tenant clinic, it's a lot easier than coming down to the Justice Center. You don't have to go through security, you don't have to park. So my staff and I try to make it as easy for people to come to us and get the information they need. So at the end of the day, we want to see our neighborhoods and our communities and our homes safe.
More with Judge O'Leary in a few minutes. Stand by. for the housing court judge in Cleveland, very important office. I didn't realize how important it is, but I want to talk to him about his background, where you came from. You don't look your age, I will tell you. JC has you on camera here. I think on live. Are we doing it live?
No, but I could.
We better start doing that so everybody can see the judge. How young he looks. Where'd you come from, Judge?
I grew up in Sydney, Ohio. So my family, is all there. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you can check your listeners by where they're listening from, but you probably have a spike in listeners from Western Ohio right about now.
Oh, that is wonderful.
So, and I had actually grown a beard for the last month, and they haven't seen me shaven again. So they were commenting, on you saying that. I grew up in Sydney, Ohio, and went to Miami University for undergrad and grad school. And then when I was looking for law schools, I looked at Case and came here. Did law school here, and I met my wife at work, and she's from Cleveland, and so I stayed here. I've been very glad. My wife and our 3 daughters and I, live in Ohio City. So that's originally where I'm from. And
where's Sydney at exactly?
Sydney is about 40 miles north of Dayton. It's on I-75, just about halfway between Cincinnati and Toledo, but a hair closer to Cincinnati. So it's,
are you familiar with that famous school, Dayton University?
Yes, my high school, Lehman Catholic High School. At least when I was there, about a third of the students from my high school went to UD. I have a lot of cousins that went to UD, and so I've been there a few times myself.
Yeah, my son Michael went there.
Okay, it's a
I
good
think
school.
his wife went there too, Megan.
Okay.
It's a great school, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Of course, it costs a lot more than it used to.
I,
they all
yeah,
do.
I haven't looked at college costs since I left, but my oldest daughter is in 7th grade, and my wife and I know that that's not that far. That's not that far down the road. But we're looking at high schools now, but we know college is coming.
Oh, yeah. You're 50 years old.
Not quite.
Almost. Oh, wait a minute.
Got a few years. I'm
Not till you get there.
47,
No,
but,
40, oh, you're
but
47.
I know 50's just around the
Oh,
corner.
that's right. Well, you don't look at it. I want to get back to the court again.
Yes.
How important it is to our community. The preservation of housing in any community
Yes.
is super important, isn't it?
Yes.
A whole city can survive or die
Yes.
on the quality of housing,
That's true.
and it brings people to cities. How has Cleveland been doing, though, the city of Cleveland?
We had a rough about dozen years, and right about the time that Mayor Jackson became mayor and I went to the building department, we really started to see the foreclosure crisis hitting. And
Of course, that was everywhere.
It was everywhere, but it hit parts of Cleveland particularly hard. We had in the North Broadway neighborhood, that was, I believe, one of the highest per capita foreclosure rates in the country. And so there was a lot of focus on Cleveland during the foreclosure crisis. But one of the challenges is, like I mentioned before, our housing stock is older. 70, 80 years, for a house is pretty much the norm in Cleveland. And most of it is wood frame. So you could have a house that's well maintained, and if it's vacant for more than a year or two, the deterioration sets in very quickly. And so, there are large parts of the city that really were hit incredibly hard. Some parts of the city, remained fairly stable. Old Brooklyn, Cams, West Park. Some other parts were, remained stable even though they were challenged. But there were whole swaths of the other parts of the city. Particularly North Broadway, Slavic Village, Collinwood, Glenville, and there are pockets that weren't that bad, but still you'd see whole streets that were vacant.
Now, I have heard that, for instance, you mentioned Slavic Village.
Yes.
They've never really come out of that recession, is that?
I would say that, in my estimation, there's other people that may have a different opinion. I really see Slavic Village as having turned a corner, and they're
Have they?
seeing some real growth. Their councilman there, Tony Brancatelli, has put incredible focus on housing issues. He chairs the committee that deals with housing issues, and he had been the executive director of Slavic Village Development Corp before he became a councilman. So, he and Slavic Village Development are really focused on housing matters and have been for years. I see Slavic Village as largely having turned a corner, and they're able to focus not just on dealing with the severe blight, but they're now starting to really focus on a lot of development. There's a lot of infill housing that I'm seeing, a lot of businesses moving back, and I think it was the Slovenian home that I went to last year, probably about this time, maybe a little earlier, and it was absolutely packed. Line out the door of people wanting to go there. So it still has challenges. All parts of the city do, but I think Slavic Village has.
I think
really
Carlin
turned it.
Hall is there, isn't it? Carlin
It is.
Hall.
Yes.
Yeah. Joe Kozak, who did a radio program on this station
Okay.
for, I think Joe was on the air for 45 years. He retired a couple of years ago, but he lives in the house that he grew up in. Joe's in the
Okay.
70s now, and he lives in the same house.
Oh, that's
Slavic
great.
Village, still
Great.
there. I don't know if he's listening. He usually listens to us, so he's probably
Okay.
listening. So good morning, Joe, if you're listening. What about the people that bought a lot of these dilapidated houses during the crisis?
Yes.
How do you handle that? And I'm sure some of the enterprises were successful, but I'm sure some weren't, and some kind of fell down and didn't do what they were supposed to. What happens in a case like that?
Well, again, if it's something that they still own the house, I take all the circumstances into consideration. If somebody bought a house and they put their last dollar into it just to buy it and they're struggling, you handle them more sort of coaching them through the process to get them into a better situation. Contrast that with someone that bought 40, 50, 60 houses, 100 houses as investments and just thought that they were going to sit on them. And we saw that a lot. People who would buy homes at sheriff sale, and they might buy something, they might buy a house for $2,000 and figure, if I can flip it in a month for $2,500, well, I made $500. And they're looking at, if I can do that on one, I can do that on 50. So I handle those owners quite differently because they invested and didn't make some good choices. Now, I still look to see how we can get the best outcome. One other sort of partner in all of these housing issues that's been tremendously effective is the county land bank. I've been doing housing-related matters for almost 20 years, and one of the first things that I learned is there's no silver bullet. Everybody's looking for one, but there really isn't one. But one of the biggest game changers that we had was when the county land bank was created. Some local people really pushed hard for that.
What is it? Would you explain it?
Yes, it's technically it's called the Cuyahoga County Land Reutilization Corporation. It's a nonprofit organization, but it has some quasi-governmental authority. And what they do, they do receive public funding through some different sources. But basically what they do is they have the ability to take in large numbers of properties and then decide what's best for them.
Now, they get those properties for nothing, right? They just take them over, is that correct?
It depends. Most of the time that's true. I can't say that they've never purchased something. Sometimes it might make sense if there's a development project that's going on and they've been able to acquire a number of properties. I can't say that they've never bought a holdout property. I just don't know whether they have or not. But most of their properties do come to them through tax foreclosure. So you have a property that goes through tax foreclosure and it's certified that its value is less than what the taxes are. those properties then come to the county land bank. They have the ability, I believe, to say no to certain properties, but they take in a tremendous number of properties under those circumstances. They also take in donations. So a lot of the time when I see somebody, that comes into my court who they don't want to own the property anymore, we will facilitate getting them through the process to donate to the land bank. Some banks will donate to the land bank, particularly ones that are defendants in my courtroom. So the land bank can take in properties through a number of different routes, and then what they decide is whether the property can be saved or not. They do a lot of renovation work, but they also do a lot of demolition.
Are the taxes absorbed by the land bank? In other words, the owner that defaults, he doesn't know anything anymore once the land bank takes it over. Is that correct?
That's right. The taxes basically get wiped out through the foreclosure process. And if someone wants to donate to the land bank, donate a house, as long as it's free of all liens except the taxes, it can be a direct donation. So if the only encumbrance on a property is the property taxes, they can do a direct donation. We see oftentimes though that there are other liens. There may be a mortgage, that's the most likely. Sometimes there's a hospital bill lien or a mechanic's lien or something similar to that. And my staff will work with those other lien holders to try to get those released, and then it can be a donation to the land bank. So the land bank demolishes a lot of the properties that can't be saved. They do have a rehab program that they will sell directly to owner occupants. They also work with different rehab contractors. So again, the land bank's not a silver bullet, but it's been one of the most significant changes that's helped our housing really in the 20 years that I've been doing this.
It's 11:19 here on the Irish Show on WHK. Say, I was a friend of his. You and him worked together for many years.
Yes.
Thoughts, please.
Well, I mentioned that we have had a housing court since 1981, and Judge Pianka served as judge of the court longer than all of the other judges combined, and really built it into the asset for Cleveland that it is. When Judge Pianka started, there were a handful of staff members, and he really took the attitude that the court was there to serve the people in Cleveland, and that he viewed his job as leading the court in being able to go out into the community and make it accessible for people.
And he lived in the community also, didn't he?
He did. He lived in Detroit Shoreway.
Never leave it.
No, all of his life. And I joked a little bit. I actually live on the same street he did.
You live there too? Huh?
I do. He and his family lived on Franklin at Boulevard in Detroit Shoreway. My family and I live on Franklin Boulevard in Ohio City. So, both near West Side. And, the coming to the court, even though, I came from the building department and the city law department, it is different. It's sort of looking at the same, situation, but from a different angle. And I'm grateful that I had the chance to, really know the judge as long as I did and learn as much as I could from him. And, what's even another facet of it, all the people that he brought to the court and the expertise that they had and that they learned from him. Indirectly, I'm still learning a lot from him through the magistrates and the housing court specialists and others. So, our court really is as good as it is because of Judge Pianka.
Let me go back to your family again.
Yes.
Let's go back to Sydney, Ohio here
Yes.
for a few minutes.
Yes.
Talk to me about the actual family, the O'Leary family.
Sure. Living in Cleveland, I have questions frequently. Are you related to this O'Leary, in Lakewood, or that O'Leary in Strongsville? And I periodically do get the question of, was it your grandmother whose cow kicked over the lamp? And I said, well, no, not unless it was way back, because my family, when they came to the United States from Ireland, came straight to Sydney. My great-great-grandfather was from County Wexford. My great-great-grandmother from County Tyrone. Came through Canada and down to Sydney.
Grosse
and
Isle,
stayed.
probably.
I'm sorry?
Grosse Isle, they probably came through.
I know something about the St. Lawrence Seaway
Yeah,
that
it would
it
be.
went through, but so it came to Sydney. Probably, I believe it was either late 1850s, early 1860s, and have been there since. And I'm an attorney, and my wife is an attorney. Most of my relatives, or many of my relatives, are either teachers or law enforcement, and they always say, we hope that you're a prosecutor. But in particular, the family's proud that my great grandfather, started off as a blacksmith and became a police officer in his late 20s. Served on Sydney's police force for, I believe it was 62 years.
Oh my goodness.
And 54 of those he was the chief of police.
Chief.
So we believe that that's the longest serving police chief in the country. I'm not quite sure how we'd ever verify that, but even if he's not, there aren't many that are gonna be chief for that long. So a lot of cousins, police officers, sheriffs, deputies.
I bet he knew everything about everybody. Had a lot of skeletons that man knew about.
He did, and he was much taller than me. I believe he was about 6'3", 6'4". So I'm somehow or other lucky that I got to 5'8". But I never met him. He passed before I was born. But my great grandmother, his wife, she was still with us when I was small. But what I heard, carried a sidearm and an asp or something. But it said never used the service weapon. But I suppose if you're 6'4",
Never had to. How big is Sydney? How big was it?
It's about 20,000 people.
Oh, it's a small town.
It is. It's in Shelby County. It's the county seat, Shelby County. So it's the biggest town in Shelby County. There's a string of cities about the same size, all up and down I-75. Between, like I said, Toledo and Cincinnati. But it's a nice experience. Growing up, where your family's all around you, and your neighbors, and everybody. My family's gone to Holy Angels Parish since it was founded, pretty much. So my sister is there. She and her husband and their boys. So we get home and see people as often as we can.
Great, great. Jack and Mary Corner, good friends of mine, and Jack